They were the perfect picture: smart, successful, and envied by friends. But behind the polished photos and anniversary toasts, she was living a secret life that undermined everything they built. He didn't explode. He collected proof, planned silently, and let the law do the rest. Cold, precise revenge. Truth with consequences. My name is Ethan Cross. I'm 49 years old. For 21 years I believed that when I married Clara I had found the axis of my small world. We built a life that looked tidy from the outside. A lake house with wide windows that caught the evening light, 2 reliable cars, a dog that slept at the foot of our bed, friends who trusted our counsel, clients who recommended us without hesitation. People called us a power couple. We accepted the compliment with the same modesty we used to pick paint colors. Cool, practiced, intentional. But for nearly 2 decades, the life I thought I knew was only a facade of sincerity. That facade finally cracked on a humid June night when a woman I had never met phoned me and said 3 words that would change everything: "She's at a hotel." Her tone was gentle. She was the wife of a man named Michael Harris, a real estate developer who had contracted Clara's boutique design firm to refinish a penthouse. She called out of courtesy, or perhaps out of her own moral awkwardness, and I remember the embarrassed way she apologized for becoming the bearer of a private disaster. Her voice landed inside me and didn't leave. It lodged like a small stone in a shoe. You can walk on with it, but you never truly forget the discomfort. I didn't drive to that hotel. Confrontation has a certain thesis in movies: personal truth delivered in volatile moments, glass shattering, voices rising, someone packing a suitcase on camera. In life, confrontation often hands the liar a stage to practice denial. Instead, I chose a different impulse. I chose to collect facts, to trade rage for documentation, suspicion for evidence. That decision felt surgical, practical. It required an internal shift from being the injured husband to becoming an investigator of my own life. I called a man who owed me a favor from a renovation years earlier. Ray Carter, a private investigator with a careful voice and the knack for observing what others miss. Ray installed a compact recording device into Clara's work car, a small, nearly invisible camera, and set up a discreet audio feed at the modest office space she used for client meetings. I told Ray, only the truth. Nothing theatrical. The recordings arrived in small, steady packages. A voice message, a video clip, a bank line item. They painted a parallel life in precision. The first clip I watched was not cinematic. It was ordinary in every ruinous, intimate way. Clara laughing softly, calling someone M, with a tone that had a private cadence I had never heard for myself. She said, "If Ethan ever finds out, I'll call it business." A laugh. "He'll never suspect." The words were lethal in their casualness. If Ethan ever finds out. It implied a plan. The content of the plan didn't need to be violent to be devastating. It simply needed to be real. Then the bank statements. Expenses marked as client entertainment, but actually covering hotel stays and dinners that corresponded to the recordings. 2 months of discrete charges, almost $8,800, flowing out of our joint account for nights that carried someone else's name and an intimate rhythm. Money reduces the messy emotion of betrayal into a ledger you can hold. Numbers are facts that a judge understands. That clarity steadied me. I took the files to Melissa Grant, a family attorney with a reputation for turning chaos into structure. Melissa read through our photographs, the audio transcriptions, the receipts, the calendar entries that showed recurring meetings, labeled as breakfasts and site visits. She sat very still and then said, "We can do 2 things. We can make a scene or we can make the law work. The law is slow, but it remembers evidence." We chose the law. But we chose strategy too. There is a certain elegance to a carefully executed plan. Revenge in this context is not a hot wave of violence. It is patient architecture. It is the way an engineer draws margin lines, allowing weight to fall exactly where it must so a structure collapses, not from brute force, but because its foundational assumptions no longer hold. Clara had always been a consummate performer. Her housewarming and reveal parties were the kind that made strangers want to ask for her business card. She curated images the way painters curate light. So when she planned our 20th anniversary celebration, she did what she always did. She made everything beautiful. She arranged the dinner tables by the lake so that lanterns reflected on water and music softened the edges of the evening. Friends traveled from out of town. Clients RSVP'd. Her mother sat in the 3rd row with the same proud smile she'd worn at our wedding. The night was a full-service advertisement for a life well kept. As guests arrived, I sat quietly in the glow and rehearsed a different role than the one I'd played for 2 decades. I was calm. I was meticulous. I had studied how spectacle works. When the moment came for the toast, I stood and asked for a small favor. I made a short film of our life together. I'd like to share it. People smiled. Everyone likes to see themselves framed by a couple's history, to watch the montage where everything lines up like a succession of chosen Polaroids. The film opened with wedding shots, postcards, vacations, Jasper chasing waves. People relaxed into memory. Then the images shifted. It wasn't done to incite drama. There were no shouting headlines on the screen. Instead, the video used the clips and logs that Ray and I had compiled and presented them with time stamps. Clara checking into a hotel, the soft-spoken voice calling M, a dinner receipt matched to the date she told me she was attending a board meeting. Receipts for bouquets delivered to a downtown apartment that did not belong to any client. GPS ping times that contradicted corporate travel logs. The footage was clinical. It was a ledger projected onto linen cloth and reflected in the lake. The silence after the film was a sound that has a physical quality. It pressed against my eardrums. People exchanged glances, then moved into whispering. To Clara's credit, to the extent that it is credit, she did not scream. She sat. Her hands trembled slightly, almost imperceptible, and then she folded them in her lap. I walked out of that celebration not because I wanted to escape, but because I wanted the space for truth to find its consequences without the adrenaline of shame being the only fuel. Word moved faster than rumor in a town where reputation is currency. Within days, clients reevaluated contracts. Designers and realtors who had once spoken on her behalf hesitated on the phone. A market that thrives on trust makes its own judgments quickly. People choose vendors by an assessment of reliability and ethics. The perception that someone's personal choices reflect a pattern that could influence professional duties is potent. I filed quietly. Melissa had me prepare everything. A marriage inventory, proof of joint account contributions, tax returns, the receipts showing Clara's expense recounting. We petitioned the court in a manner that favored discretion. We were not out for spectacle. We were out for justice and for the preservation of dignity. In a community property state, adultery and misuse of marital funds are blunt instruments in the hands of the honest. Judges look at evidence and patterns. So did we. In the hearing, Clara argued the thesis of emotional neglect and the half-truth about lack of communication, a narrative many find familiar in divorce cases. Melissa responded with evidence. Recordings that showed consistency far beyond the occasional lapse, bank transactions for nights and weekends that matched the pattern, and email correspondences suggesting planning rather than intermittent weakness. The judge's face was an archive of due process. He read exhibits, asked for clarifications, and set the stage for a settlement that would account for more than sentiment. When the settlement arrived, it was practical in its measures. I retained the house. I retained the car that had my morning coffee stains in the passenger seat and the dent that Jasper had left by jumping into its back hatch. Clara was ordered to reimburse the specific amount she'd used to fund the affair. She was denied spousal support. Her firm required restructuring to regain the confidence of clients. Michael's life unraveled in parallel. His marriage filed for divorce, his firm lost significant investments. The courthouse docket recorded what social media later amplified. Private betrayals have public consequences once a pattern is made visible. But I am not here to celebrate damage. Rebalancing a metric of treasure does not fill the hole left by trust's absence. 4 months after the court's gavel, grief arrived in small, precise ways. The grief was sticky, a mug that smelled of a perfume I no longer associated with comfort, a playlist I had compiled for long drives that now felt like a ledger of absence, a bedroom where silences had the shape of conversations we would never have again. Grief is not a single night of weeping in a movie. It is a long apprenticeship in which you learn how to wake up with one fewer dream. Nonetheless, there are surprising economies in recovery. Friends I had taken for granted, honest people who had been quiet during the unraveling, reached out with casseroles, with small acts of normalcy that felt like lifelines. A former colleague offered me a consulting gig that allowed me to travel and think without being swallowed by sorrow. Ray closed his file with a small envelope, a note that said simply, "You did the right thing." Melissa arranged a schedule of next steps that turned legal aftermath into steps that made life manageable. Time, like a careful hand, reconstructs the practical aspects of life. I painted rooms in new colors. A living room that had been beige turned to a slate blue that felt honest and awake. I made small design projects for myself and worked with fewer, simpler clients. I kept the dog. I learned to be alone without feeling abandoned. There is a subtle power in continuity. It is the quiet subversion of those who believed I would never continue. A few months after the final decree, Clara sent an email with the subject line, "Closure." Her message was compact and human: apology, admission of consequences, claim of regret. It was typed with the same tidy attention she gave to a client proposal. The truth in that note was neither explosive nor theatrical. It was simply true. It contained the human recognition that actions cause ripples beyond immediate satisfaction. I read it, folded it into an unread space, and did not respond. Not out of anger or coldness, simply because closure is not a response typed into a text box. Closure, in its truest form, is a life rebuilt without expectation. The lessons of this kind of betrayal are not unique to me, though the particulars are. First, document. If you suspect deception, gather evidence prudently and legally. Second, involve counsel who can translate personal pain into legal strategy, someone who does not need to perform theatrics. Third, understand that revenge does not have to be spectacular to be effective. In my case, the most powerful action was the refusal to continue enabling the deception and the willing conversion of private evidence into public accountability. There is another lesson that is humbler and more profound: learning to recalibrate what you call comfort. Comfort, I discovered, can be a trap if it is mistaken for comprehension. For years I equated contentment with intimacy. They are different things. Contentment can be quiet and forgiving to a partner's self-discipline, but intimacy requires more than shared quiet. It requires a continual, often uncomfortable conversation about boundaries, motivations, and desires. In that gap, deception grows. A mature partnership requires vigilance and mutual honesty. People ask me if I feel satisfied. Satisfaction is a small, brittle word. What I felt after the legal work was alignment, the idea that truth and consequence were no longer misaligned. That felt less loud than triumphant, more calming than victorious. The immediate impulse for dramatic revenge, a scene at a restaurant, a viral public shaming, would not have given me the equilibrium I needed. Instead, slow work did. And so did the courage to be mundane again, to make coffee in the same mug, to take the boat across the lake on a Sunday, to repair a stair that had once creaked when someone else walked down it. Months turned into a year. I kept working. I kept building. I kept the house and rearranged how the rooms related to one another. The lake that had once framed our best photographs became a canvas I used to think on. The dog did not judge. Friends who had been steady sat with me more often. I began to date again, eventually but cautiously, not to replace, but to expand the thinness of loneliness with the warmth of human company. Now, 14 months after the gavel, I look back with a mix of sorrow and gratitude. Sorrow for what was lost, the private rituals, the small gestures, the imagined future. Gratitude for the lessons learned and for the people who did not leave when life became complicated. I also learned that the most powerful kind of revenge has nothing to do with inflicting misery and everything to do with living well afterward. It is a kind of moral economy. You conserve your dignity by refusing to allow someone else's deception to define the terms of your life. If you are watching this because you are wounded by betrayal, know this: you are not responsible for someone else's choices. You are responsible for how you respond. If possible, work with professionals. Document facts. Preserve evidence. Pace yourself. The world often tries to sell us quick catharsis, but the slow return to stability is where you reclaim your life. This story is not an invitation to rejoice at someone's downfall. It is a map of how truth, used responsibly, can restore balance. I tell it because the quiet architecture of justice, papers filed, ledgers balanced, testimonies recorded, can do what shouting never does. It produces consequences with minimal spectacle and maximal clarity. It permits you to keep your humanity intact even when you make others account for theirs. If this story resonated with you, if it gave you a sense of clarity or the courage to suspect what you suspected, please like this video. Comment below with what you would have done in my place, or share your story in the comments if you feel safe. If you want more real accounts of betrayal, recovery, and calm justice, subscribe and help this channel reach 5,000 subscribers. Share this with someone who needs to hear a quiet version of justice, not a theatrical one. Together we can turn private heartbreak into public learning. You are watching Revenge Uncut. Thank you for listening. Be well. Live honestly. Let truth do the quiet work it always does. Please visit our channel for more such stories.